Practicing Happy, number 16, Frames and Reframing.
And who do we got on our podcast today? Is it anybody different?
No, same old, same old. I'm Brian. You're Dan. Let's get it going.
Maybe we'll look for a guest at some point.
Uh, yeah, maybe.
You know, maybe not.
Does anybody like us well enough to show up?
Yeah, probably not.
Who can say? So, we're going to be talking about frames and reframing. Why do we want to talk about frames, Dan?
I think that framing and reframing is one of our most powerful tools that we've talked about so far, and we talked about it earlier in another podcast, but it was kind of rough. And so I think you and I both agree it's worth a revisit because it's one of our favorites, and we think one of the most powerful tools that we have. And essentially, there's a very limited amount of facts about the universe that are brutal truths for us. I'm gonna wake up tomorrow and still probably be my same height and weight roughly, and I have to accept those things as truths about my life. But the rest of it, situationally, is dependent on how I want to reframe and frame my situation. So I have a collection of details about any situation that I'm in, and I can choose, however I want to, how to interpret those details. So
Mm-hmm.
I can wake up tomorrow with extra blankets on my bed, and that can mean one of two things to me. I can decide that, wow, I had too many blankets on my bed, and now I'm way too hot, and I hate that. Or I can think to myself, wow, I have extra blankets on my bed. I don't quite need all these blankets because I'm too hot, so I can give them to other people. And that's a great blessing. So it's
Yeah.
just about that kind of reframing of every situation.
Mm-hmm. So, for our purposes, we're going to say a frame is sort of the set of beliefs, assumptions, attitudes about the world as it is. And I think frame is a good metaphor here because, you think about a painting hanging in a museum. It doesn't stand by itself. It's set within a context, right? And while the painting is sort of the fact, the frame around it actually shapes how you perceive it. And if you ever want to go down an interesting wiki hole, look up the development of the modern techniques for displaying artwork. So, frames. Two questions we really need to train ourselves to ask constantly are first, what frame am I looking through right now? So we need to be aware of it. And then, what is the productive frame in this moment? So, we've slipped into using that expression, the productive frame. And it just is one of those delightful things that just sort of appeared between the two of us in our language. And I don't remember at what point it came in, but it describes something that I think is really important, which is the productive frame is the frame which makes the world as it is in this moment make the maximum possible contribution to your well-being. So a given set of facts, and this is key, we're acknowledging all the facts here. There's no wishing away anything that's true of the world.
Right.
Acknowledging all the things that are true right now, what is the way to view this collection of facts that makes an experience that contributes the most to your well-being? So the productive frame is what we're always seeking.
What are some other frames that you think that people are looking through more often than not? Like when we ask the question, like, what frame am I looking through right now? Like, we want to choose the most productive. We want to frame the situation the most productive way possible.
Yeah. Okay, so here's scenario. Your wife calls you to tell you she's been in a car accident. She's
Right.
fine. Baby's fine. So how do you frame that? You can go like frame number one. This is going to be a hassle to sort out, and I have to deal with all this insurance and paperwork, and she's going to be stressed out, and I'm going to be stressed out, and this is going to be terrible.
Gotcha.
That's a frame. Or, wow, I'm so lucky that everybody's okay. Accidents happen in life. Everybody goes through some hardships, and hardship has touched my life, and we've come through this. Everybody's all right. This is great.
Yeah, that's an excellent way of putting it. I think that clears it up a lot.
Those are two options. Same set of facts. There's nothing that we can do to make the car uncrashed.
Yeah. That
Right? No
opportunity's
matter
pass.
no matter how we perceive this, that's true of the world. So then the question becomes, going forward, how do we contextualize this set of facts in a way that contributes the best to our well-being, right? In a way that's going to motivate the sorts of behaviors and the sorts of cognition that are going to leave us in a happy place. Right?
Right.
So that's sort of the division we're looking at. The first scenario where you're just focusing on the hassle, you're focusing on the added stress, that's an unproductive frame because you're gonna deal with all those things one way or another.
Yeah.
But creating more stress about the impending future stress isn't helping anybody. Whereas if you focus on the positives that come out of this, that's going to offset those future stresses. Yeah, I have to sort out this insurance stuff, but I have with me this whole time how lucky I am to be talking about getting body work done on my car rather than arranging a funeral.
Right.
When you set the baseline correctly, it's like, yeah, this isn't so bad, really. So that's the idea of the productive frame versus unproductive frames. We have to work to frame things productively because there are lots of unproductive frames available, and we've all been trained into bunches of them.
Sure, because a lot of those attention-seeking frames that get us the most attention are not productive ones.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the frames that are compelling to our minds are not productive one, right? You have this entire mimetic process of collections of memes grabbing your attention. They can come together and essentially form a frame. It's, nice little image of this whole collaborative effort. So we have to actively, constantly work to substitute in a productive frame. And of course, it's like everything. That sounds really onerous. That sounds like, oh, that's going to be such a hassle. It's not because it's a skill and you get better at it and it gets easier and it becomes really natural. And so you reach a point where you're just constantly reframing things towards the productive frame, basically unconsciously, the same way that you ride a bike or you drive a car. You
Right.
don't have you don't have to work really hard not to hit things in your car.
We hope. One would
When you
hope.
first, yeah, right. When you first started driving, that was a stressful affair. That was onerous, right? Oh, making sure that I push the pedal right and I put it in the right gear and all, and then it becomes unconscious. The human brain is amazing. So we have to do the work. We have to go through, that difficult sort of unsteady part where we're learning the skill. But once we learn the skill, the application is actually really easy, and it makes a tremendous difference. If you have this in your toolkit, your power to influence your experience is much greater. And that's what this is all about, right? If we're practicing being happy human beings, this is one of the main practices. So we got to talk about how to reframe. And the image here that I like to use from this is one that I've snagged from, I want to say Douglas Hofstadler, and I'm probably butchering that name, but he's a AI researcher, cognitive scientist kind of chap. Wrote some really interesting books. And then his buddy Daniel Dennett, who's a philosopher, uses the same image in some of his books. They're cool chaps. You should read their books. Just throwing that out there.
I'll have to take a look.
Dan Dennett's book, Intuition Pumps and Other Tools for Thinking, just probably my favorite book.
I had not heard about that. That's great. You'll have to send me a link when we're done here so I can
Yeah,
check it out.
absolutely. I think it's, somebody has my copy of it 'cause somebody has my copy of almost all my books, but um, I would say hands down, just the best book that I've read about using a brain. But the image that they use is sort of turning the knobs, right? And they're talking about it in the context of like philosophical thought experiments, but I think that it doesn't need to be that abstract or esoteric. Each one of our frames that we use to view a given set of facts is composed of beliefs, it's composed of assumptions, it's composed of attitudes, and collectively those come together to create the values that we assign to things. Right?
Right.
The output of a frame is an evaluation.
Right.
We got to train ourselves to twist the knobs on those. What am I believing is true about the world right now, and how is that shaping how I perceive this set of facts? What am I assuming about the world right now that's changing the way that I perceive this set of facts? And then what are my attitudes that I'm bringing to this set of facts that's changing how I perceive it? And just, okay, what if I saw something a little bit differently? Probably my first reframe of my life that I can really remember was, I grew up in a very liberal household, right?
Right.
And so for me, like corporations are automatically bad.
Yeah.
I'm talking about 17, 18-year-old me.
Yeah.
And I remember walking down the street one day. I was on my way to school. It just occurred to me like, but why? Like, okay, if these things are so bad, then why do corporations exist, right? Because they're not a natural thing in the world. Human beings went out of their way to create these legal constructs. If they are this unvarnished evil, If there's no good that comes of them, why did we do that? That doesn't make any sense,
Right. It
right?
wouldn't naturally arise if it was so bad for humanity, right?
Yeah, and so there's a belief. Corporations are always bad. So I started trying to tweak that knob, right? And, okay, well, what good could corporations provide? First thing I realized, I had no idea about anything. Right? This was a domain that I'd never, unknown. I'd never thought about this, and I didn't realize that I'd never thought about this. And I started thinking, okay, well, I guess, they provide these sort of legal structures for people to have like these large scale coordinated efforts, and they provide sort of a framework for everybody who's involved to put their efforts into. And I started researching it, and it's like, the limited liability corporation is about making sure that firms can raise capital on a large scale.
Yeah.
So it's like you can lose the capital you put in the corporation, but you can't get sued for your house. Limited liability, you see LLC,
Yeah.
is about the fact that the corporation can only lose as much money as the corporation has.
Right.
If you run a business and it's just a simple partnership, and you screw up pursuing that business, people can sue you and take your house, they can take your car, they can take your savings, they can take everything.
Yeah.
But if you incorporate your business, they can only take the assets that have been transferred to the corporation.
Which is smart, but we can make great things without like having to worry about people losing their homes and their livelihoods because they want to innovate.
Yeah, and so it incentivizes this sort of larger scale cooperation. Suddenly, that changes everything that I perceive whenever I'm reading information about, corporations and the economy and all of these things, right?
Yeah.
That's a knob tweak. That's a big change. Suddenly it goes from here's a set of facts, well, I know who the bad guy is in this story. If there's a corporation, that's the bad guy. I
Yeah.
don't have to think about this. That's the model I was running under, right? And now it's like, okay, well, there's some nuance here. I have to think about things like what's the corporate culture and what's what is this chartered for and what's its purpose and which again, it's another example where practicing in this way does cause you to actually have to think about your life and your
Right.
experiences and whatnot.
I mean, that's hard for lazy thinkers, right? Like for me, I'd be
Yeah.
like, oh man, now I have to evaluate each corporation on a case by case basis. That's so
Yeah.
much more work than just being like, nope, they all suck.
Yeah. So, flips and roundabouts. There's some ups and downs, but that's an idea of a knob tweaking. When we talk about assumptions, right? We can talk about things like how should people behave?
Right.
Or what should people do? Or what ought to be true about the world? That can really affect how you view something. We were talking about the example I was dealing with one of my students who I worked with this person on how to do their homework, and then they didn't turn it in.
Which is so wonderful.
You know,
Can you imagine getting a check and not taking it to the bank and depositing it?
yeah, well, you say that,
Yeah.
I've done it.
Right.
And so, for me, it's okay, that's an interesting behavior. So I've put all this effort in. The person, this kid's parents have put on all this effort to get them a tutor and all this stuff. And then at the end of the day, the easiest step in this process is the one that derails the whole thing. And that could be really frustrating if I have the assumption that teenagers are rational human beings that should behave sensibly. I know a little bit more than that because I remember being a teenager, and I was sitting with this kid's parents. It's just like, yeah, that's crazy behavior, and I'm totally sympathetic to it because I used to do that.
Yeah.
I used to drive my mother nuts because I know you did this. I sat there, I watched you, I made you do this. What do you mean you didn't get credit for it? Didn't turn it in. Didn't feel like it. What do you mean you didn't feel like it? I don't know. But for me, that was just that's acting out. I have a constitutional resentment of authority, and that was a way that it found expression.
Yeah.
If I have the assumption that people are going to behave rationally, well, that's a very sort of,
That's
well,
on
first
you.
off, that's a naive assumption about any human beings, but it's especially not productive for dealing with teenagers. So if I'm going to reframe that, I'm going to say, okay, let's assume that this person probably has goals other than maximizing their grade. And this is an expression of that. Let's figure out what those goals are. How can we engage with that in a productive way?
Sure.
And then, of course, I don't have to take it personally. There's an implicit assumption often that if people fail, to meet our expectations, that's an affront. That's got to be upsetting.
Right.
And tweaking that knob is incredibly helpful. Even though I'm involved in this situation, none of it's about me.
Yeah.
We've been a, we've talked about this a bunch of times, right? I barely exist in anybody's world.
Right.
I'm this tiny background character. So I gotta know that there's a larger picture here that doesn't have anything to do with me. I don't have to take this personally.
Well, sure. It's not your homework. It's not your child. It's you know what I mean. It's like there's
Yeah,
a lot of degrees of separation. Like yeah, you're getting paid to tutor this person, but ultimately like you can't make decisions for them.
yeah. I don't have to take that as a failure. I don't have to take and then when we're talking about attitudes, I can just bring positivity. The upshot to all of this is often this gets boiled down by our frame into a collection of values. So our beliefs, our assumptions, and our attitudes come together, they create a value, and then that value is the way that we weigh a given circumstance. If we go back to the your wife's been in an accident sort of example, what do we value? Is not being hassled the central value that we're evaluating everything on? Or is the well being of my family the central value?
Well, we can all tell. I can tell you what it ought to be.
There's what it ought to be, but for a lot of people, that's not what it is.
Yeah.
We tweak all of these little knobs in order to produce a different final value. Run it through a few times there.
It's very easily done in real time if you really practice at it and you really just want to have a certain experience. You can do that all the time, and it's not. It doesn't have to be something as serious as like a car accident. It can be little things too.
Oh, yeah. I had this one experience one time.
That's just kind of a funny line.
Oh,
I had this one
yeah.
experience one time.
This one, only one time in my life did a thing happen. No. I had this experience one day where I was sitting in a chair and I was reading a book, and I had just a sudden thought. I don't know this. This is very much a tenuous proposition here, but I think I put a glass of water next to my chair before I sat down here.
Right.
I had a moment where I actually really doubted that. I was like, did I fabricate this? Right? I don't know. Is the universe going to comply with me here? Are we going to be in sync?
Uh huh.
And and I kind of just enjoyed living in that for a moment because I'm an oddball. But then I looked,
Yeah.
and sure enough, there's a glass of water there, just
Damn.
exactly as I remember it.
Life is good.
Right? Life is good. Um, and in that moment, what I was playing with was, what's my assumption? My assumption is that my memories should line up with what's going on in the universe, right? I think we all kind of tacitly operate with this assumption that our memories are a good record of what's going on. And we could do an entire podcast about that
Oh
because that's
man,
not true.
that's a huge can of worms.
But that assumption that it should line up means that every time it does, that's not even worthy of comment. And so tweaking that assumption, hey, what if I live in a world where my memory isn't a solid record of what's going on, suddenly changes the value. So suddenly it's like, hey, the brain got it right. This is great. Awesome. Thank you, brain. Thank you, universe. That might strike somebody as strange, but that is, if we look at this collection of facts, I'm sitting in a chair and there's a glass of water over here. What is the productive frame? Is the productive frame the one where I see the glass of water and I go, awesome, great, and it's making a contribution to my happiness in that moment? Or is the productive frame the one where I just go, yeah, I put that glass of water there,
Ooh.
right?
Yeah.
It becomes, it's one of those things that sounds really ludicrous, but it's really possible to consistently frame your experiences so that the mundane is a contributor to your well-being. The simplest little experiences can make you really have a better life experience.
I think another thing I like to do too is reframe off of something we talked about in an earlier podcast, which is like, and I can't remember the exact terminology we were using or like section we were in, but we were talking about like acknowledging the small victories, no matter how small.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I get, for a lot of people, I think, you get home at the end of the day and you're like, man, what did I just like take a mental, like, list of like, what did I get done today? Like, what happened? There's three things that I set out to do every day. I set
Hmm.
out to exercise, floss, and do something productive in the house. Those are my only three goals.
Hmm.
And so I can get home sometimes and be in a situation where I'm feeling not too great about what I've accomplished so far. Like I'm in bed
Hmm.
already, I'm not getting out, I'm not gonna floss. But I can dig back through and reframe a few things to maybe like meet those goals. Like, well, yeah, but you did carry all those boxes in from your cart a day of apple juice. That's
Hmm.
technically a bit of exercise. And you did, X, Y, it doesn't really matter what it is. But you can use those two
Yeah, and
together to kind of I use those two together to kind of reframe sometimes.
yeah, and so a couple of points on that. One, that's an example of just having an adult relationship with your dopamine system.
Right.
So you have to decide what counts as winning in your life. That's part of sort of a bigger frame issue. If we wanted to get into classification, we could talk about like little micro frames and macro frames and stuff like that. We're not doing that.
Yeah.
You have to set the overall course of what your life looks like. You have to decide what the goals are, and you have to decide what counts as winning in any given moment. Those are all responsibilities you have as a human. And if you don't actively do those things, then that will get decided for you, and the decisions that are made for you will suck, and you will be miserable. Oh, almost without fail.
Yeah.
There, there are a few blessed humans out there who are so good natured and have such, sort of positive dispositions innately that maybe they don't have to make those decisions. They'd probably be better off if they did, but it might work out for some people. For most of us, it's not gonna. That sounds a little bit ludicrous, right? Like, oh, well, I carried those boxes. That counts as exercise, right? There's a little voice that says, no, that's cheating,
Yeah.
right?
Sure.
And that voice is wrong. There's actually evidence that that voice is wrong. There's a study where they took a bunch of folks, I believe it was in Las Vegas, who were working in hotels, and they did split them up into two groups, and they did two training exercises. And one, they showed them like a safety video, right?
Hmm.
And then in the other one, they showed them a safety video and a video explaining how much physical exertion went into their job every day,
Right.
and that physical exertion was actually exercise. No other intervention. The people who got the brief that said, hey, what you're doing actually counts as exercise, lost more weight.
Which is amazing.
Because there's an extent to which getting that box ticked actually causes your body to respond to that differently than if you don't frame it that way.
Right.
So, you know, this sort of thing can sound like it's sort of esoteric, but this has really physiological consequences for the human organism. How you frame things actually changes how your body responds to the events of your life.
And so it shouldn't be any different for the mind.
No, well, it should be
It's
any
more
different for
work.
the entire mind body system.
Yeah.
That's a thing to keep in mind, is that everything that you do that changes how you experience the world changes how your body responds to the world. And it's one of those things that I always like to put a caution in here, because at that point, that's where you slip into the woo woo mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
Right? Like people make a leap from that to it's just mind over matter. It's just, and then next thing you know, people are trying to cure their cancer with a juice cleanse.
Uh-huh.
And,
Or eating
you
all
know,
fruit diet. Yeah.
yeah, gets a little wonky, right? And it's not to say that if you can't reframe facts out of existence, right? So I was talking to somebody recently about that with depression, right? You can't make depression not a thing if that's what your brain is doing, because
Hmm.
that's your brain chemistry. What you can do is change your experience of that, right? What you can do is change the extent to which that causes a negative interference in your life. The bias is there towards the sorts of cognition that are more prominent with depression, but if you can account for that bias, if you can bake that into your frame, if you can change the way that you're evaluating the facts, then you can mitigate, you can offset. You have a better experience within the constraints that exist for you as a human being. And that's what this is about. The brute facts are constraints on the set of possible experiences we can have, but our frame lets us move within that set. And that set of possible experiences is just so much bigger than people realize. A lot of folks are living in the way that they frame their experience is so unconscious to them. It's so long practiced since before they really had the tools to even think about this sort of thing. Going back into childhood. Oh, here's the example. So going back into childhood, look at little kids falling down. I mean, first, let's take a moment to
Let,
look at little kids falling down because it's
let me tell you
hilarious.
all about that.
How children are trained to respond to that. If a little kid falls down and you cheer for them, they just cruise along. Oh,
Hmm.
well, that hurt a little bit, and then they're off to the next thing. If a little kid falls down and you freak out, they are trained that this is a terrible bad thing that has
Yep.
happened. You start building up that frame for them that anytime they fall down, they have to be very stressed out about it.
Yeah.
And before they have any chance to really experience the world meaningfully for themselves, you've built into their experience a frame that is unproductive. If every time you stumble, that's a situation where you have to stop and engage in some histrionics that don't contribute any value to your life, that gets moved into domain after domain after domain.
Yeah. No, you just start cross applying that to all sorts of challenges and setbacks.
That's another example of this sort of thing. Any parting thoughts on this topic?
I
Hmm.
think, for me, I would say that like this is a daily practice tool.
Hmm.
And I think that I'm surprised at how often I get to use it. And I think that you know, it's one of the things that can contribute to happiness more than any of the other tools we've talked about probably. And so, um, I
Hmm.
certainly, again, and it's just remembering to bring it into what I do daily. So I think,
Yeah, so this is the meat of the practice.
right.
There are a lot of tools and techniques that are centered around raising your awareness of what's going on. But once we get into the stage of now I gotta use that knowledge to make something happen, this is where the moment to moment effort goes. This is the skill that is going to be practiced over and over and over again. And it really becomes something where it does become unconscious and it has this interesting experiential feel, not necessarily being volitional. When you're good at it,
Yeah.
you're cruising. The image that I like to use for that is it's like I'm walking through a field and I'm just staring at my toes, right? Just walking on, tromping along, just staring straight at my toes, and then somebody walks up behind me, grabs my shirt collar, and just yanks it backwards,
Hmm.
right? And all of a sudden, boom! Now my eyes are on the horizon, and I see all of these possibilities.
Truly, that's a very good example of it. I also think it's important to note, like for me, I find that for myself personally, there's one big reframing moment a day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I don't want to, throughout a lot of our podcasts, I've talked about my personal life in the restaurant, and just using like a regular example would be like a lot of people, they're walking out of the coffee shop and they step off the curb wrong and their coffee ends up all over their shirt and that ruins their day. Or,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I know this is just kind of a remedial example, but again, that's a moment where you can say, like, that's going to be an interesting conversation piece today. Like, that's going to get me talking to people that maybe I haven't talked to before. It's going to give me some opportunities to have interesting
Yeah.
dialogues. And
Yeah.
you're going to have that moment once a day where, like, something something bad is going to happen. And
Can I give you the example from my life for that?
sure, yeah.
A little less mundane. I was walking to the bus stop one day. I'm thinking about what I got to do that day. I had a couple students that I had to meet with. I had to go to the other side of town, all this stuff. And a bird shit on my face, just right in my face. And I had, right, just not even on the side, just dead center, just tagged me in the nose, straight down the whole kit and caboodle. So I'm sputtering and spitting like, don't let this get in my mouth. Oh Jesus, no. All right, and I'm walking along, and I'm like, well, I don't have time, right? Like I have to get on this bus or I'm going to be late to meet with my student, and then that's going to throw my whole day out of whack, right? And here's the pivot point, and I just had the experience of, okay, what takes care of me in this, right? And I'm like, I'm going home and taking a shower.
Yeah,
This isn't really even a question, right? So let's just stop entertaining anything about anything, right? All I got to do is I'm going to send a text message to my student that says, hey, sorry, I'm going to be late. A bird just pooped on my mouth.
yeah.
So, and he's going to be understanding of that because he's a human being,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And
I think it's important to be aware that there's two roads to travel down there. Like two roads are going to
yeah,
diverge into wood, and you can spend a lot of time and energy and resources being upset about that, or you can
uh-huh.
reframe it in a way that's healthy and productive for your day.
And I can tell you this much, that was one of the best things that happened to me that week. Because I got to tell that story. I got to ride the high of that story for like a week, right? Whenever anybody starts complaining about, oh my god, let me tell you how shit my day's been, and be like, did I mention a bird shit right on my mouth?
How do you? Yeah, you get to
Right?
one up the whole
So,
week.
yeah, get to one up the whole week. Perfect icebreaker. Just like, oh, how's your day been? Well, bird pooped on me.
So there's
Right in
that.
my face. So there's that. But, hanging in there. Rolling. Let's do this. That's very much an example of in the moment, like, desperately needed to have the skill already set up in advance of reframing, right? Because there's some assumptions about the world and about attitudes.
Yeah,
Like, one, nothing should poop on me. I should go through pretty much every day without having poop on me. That, I mean, maybe, now you're a parent, so maybe you'd had to relax that one.
yeah. That
But,
has to, you know,
but I, as a, as
it's
a,
really a reframing of how much poop am I gonna get.
yeah, I, as a single adult human being, should be able to make it through a day without any public poop contact.
Yeah.
And then, how do I have to feel? How do I have to present? How do I have to be in the world when I get pooped on? Right? That there are a lot of attitudes available about that. There are a lot of narratives that say like, "Hey, this is a space where you could probably be a little bit pissed off." No, but like if I was surly throughout the rest of the day and people are like, "Oh, what's going on? Are you?" It's like, "Yeah, a bird pooped right on my mouth today."
Then they have to commiserate with you.
Yeah, but people would be forgiving of that, right? There's
Sure.
there's not going to be a tremendous social sanction of that, right? So
But
that's a place.
I still think coming at it from that direction is like, pouring bad vibes out into the world, whereas you could, you know what I mean? Like the
Yeah,
way you reframed it is better. I think that's a good note to have on there.
yeah, that's not a productive frame, even though that there's no external forces pushing against that frame,
Yeah.
because I've got the skill that I've practiced for a decade. In the moment, I'm in a place where it's possible to immediately reframe that, right? So I'm walking home laughing, right? Just like I walked in, and my housemate's like, "Jeez, you're back quick," and I'm like, "Yeah, bird pooped right on my face, dude, just right in here in my mouth hole." And it's like I have an entire lifetime now of getting to enjoy that story,
Yeah.
and I'm going to get the maximum enjoyment out of it. I'm not going to go out there and seek out opportunities to get pooped on again, but since it happened,
Yeah.
since it's a fact that I can change nothing about, I'm looking for the productive frame. And that's,
I think that's a good place to draw it up.
yeah.